Hello everyone, it's Nakash. Dr. Welch has reached out to me to walk you guys through the microscopic anatomy of muscles. So that is exactly what we're going to do here. So first we have a muscle. So if you notice, these muscles are made up of these small circular square type things. And these are called fascicles. So muscles are made up of fascicles. Now let's go ahead and imagine that we just take one of these fascicles and we pluck them out. What would that look like? Let's go ahead and grab our fascicle. So if we took one of our fascicles and plucked them out, this is what that would look like. And I want you to take a look at the structure of a fascicle. It looks very similar to the muscle. Only thing is that these circles here are not fascicles. This entire thing is a fascicle, but these smaller circles here are called muscle fibers. I'm going to write that on the other side just so that we have some more space. These are called muscle fibers. Another thing I want you to notice is this yellow thing in the middle here. And that is not a muscle fiber. That is actually going to be a nerve. And we are going to touch up on that in just a second. So let's imagine, just as we did with the fascicle, that we take out one of these muscle fibers. We pluck out a muscle fiber. What would that look like? Let's go ahead and grab this muscle fiber right here. So we plucked out a muscle fiber. And I want you to notice the differences in the structure. So first, let's start off with what you should know. Just like any cell, muscle fibers are cells, and cells have membranes. So the first thing that I want you guys to know is these muscle fiber cells are going to have a membrane. And this membrane is going to be called the sarcolemma. And just like any other cell, muscle fibers also have a cytoplasm, and this cytoplasm is going to be called the sarcoplasm. Now let's take a look at this sarcolemma. What do you notice? First, let's go to this nerve here we just mentioned. So this nerve here is actually going to be your motor end plate. And what you should know about the motor end plate is the events that happen at the neuromuscular junction actually happen right here. So this is where your neuromuscular junction takes place. Another thing I want you to know is that if you take a look, we have these orange substances right here. And these are going to be mitochondria, but more specifically, these mitochondria are a little faint compared to the other ink on this muscle fiber because they are located under the sarcolemma. So these are going to be your subsarcolemmal mitochondria. And this muscle fiber also has other mitochondria, and these mitochondria are going to be located in between, as you can see, your myofibrils. And what are your myofibrils? Your myofibrils are these right here, these circles right here. These are going to be your myofibrils. And these are mitochondria. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our sarcolemma once again. You see a lot of green things, but before we get to those green things, we'll get to these little blue things right here. So these blue things right here are actually going to be underneath the sarcolemma, similar to your mitochondria, and they are actually going to be nuclei. So your muscle cells have a bunch of nuclei, just like any other cell, right? There's going to be a nucleus, and specifically in skeletal muscle, they are multinucleated cells. Now let's get a load of this green stuff right here. So this green stuff that's going to be wrapping completely around, the entire subsarcolemmal area is going to be your sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? Going to be your sarcoplasmic reticulum. And you will learn more about it. This is just an anatomy video, but the sarcoplasmic reticulum is intertwined and wrapped around the myofibrils, and it releases calcium. It contains a lot of calcium ions, which have a pretty crucial function in the cross-bridge cycle of sarcomeres. So if you take a look, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is like a light green, but we also have some dark green here. And this dark green is going to be what is known as a transverse tubule. In short, it is known as a T tubule. So we're going to call them T tubules. And these T tubules are very important because they conduct action potentials from the surface of the sarcolemma into the interior of the muscle fiber. So they penetrate deep into the muscle fiber and they wrap around each one of these individual myofibrils so they can carry that signal from the action potential. So one thing to note is that the transverse tubule is continuous with the sarcolemma. So anything that happens on the sarcolemma, such as an action potential, can be transmitted very quickly to the inside of the cell. And something to be familiar with is on each side of the transverse tubule, you're going to have what is known as a terminal cisterna. And together, each side, each terminal cisterna, and the transverse tubule, they are going to make up a structure known as the triad. So this right here is going to be known as a triad. So I'm going to go ahead and try to show what that looks like. So that is a triad. Both terminal cisternas on each side of the transverse tubule plus the transverse tubule makes up a triad. And these are some of the structures you should be familiar with on a muscle fiber. Now, let's go ahead and imagine that we pulled out one of these myofibrils, okay? And just to recap, muscles are made up of fascicles, and fascicles are made up of muscle fibers, and muscle fibers are made up of myofibrils. So let's go ahead and imagine that we plucked out one of these myofibrils. What would that look like? So we're going to go ahead and pluck out this myofibril right here, okay? And as you can see, these myofibrils have these jagged lines right here. They have these jagged lines right here. And if you can recognize this, this is actually a sarcomere. This is a sarcomere. The functional contractile unit of the muscle right there. And if we go deep down into the myofibril, you see these purple and red dots. So these are going to be your myofilaments. And let's imagine that we pull out one of these myofilaments. What would that look like? So let's put this one right here. And that is a myofilament. And myofilaments are made up of your thin filaments, which is your actin, and your thick filaments, which is your myosin. And if you can see very closely right here, these are going to be your myosin heads. And that is the microscopic anatomy of muscle. So let's go ahead and run through it just real quick. Muscles are made up of fascicles. This is what a fascicle looks like. Fascicles are made up of these things right here called muscle fibers. And you can also see our nerve. And when we pull out a muscle fiber, the nerve from the fascicle attaches to the sarcolemma, the cell membrane, and that is known as the motor end plate, where the events of the neuromuscular junction occur. Beneath the sarcolemma, we have our subsarcolemmal mitochondria. They sit right beneath. And we also have our nuclei. Remember, skeletal muscle is multinucleated. And if you take a look, we also have our sarcoplasmic reticulum in this light green. And on the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we also have our transverse tubule. And on each side of the transverse tubule, we have terminal cisternae. And together, they make up what is known as the triad. And if we take a look inside of our muscle fiber, we have our sarcoplasm, which is the gel-like matrix that is analogous to a cytoplasm or a cytosol. And we have our mitochondria, which sit in between our myofibrils inside of the muscle fiber. And if we take out one of these myofibrils, we get our sarcomere units. As you can see, one sarcomere here, one sarcomere from here to here, and so forth. Sarcomere units. And if we take out our myofilaments, which are those which make up those sarcomere units, we get our actin, we get our myosin, and you can see how they would form that cross bridge and cause muscle contraction. So that is an overview of microscopic anatomy of muscles.